Have you ever wished you could travel all over the world and meet masterful people in the field of education? People you may not have known and the stories you've never heard. Cup of Capacity is just that. I wanted to introduce you to masterful people in education. Some are people I have known, and some I have heard about. They were chosen for their unique impact on education and to share the insights they've learned along the way. In a digital setting, each monthly episode features an in-depth conversation with a masterful leader as they explore their journey and answer a series of questions. Grab a refreshment and let's enjoy. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Cup of Capacity. We finally named our sessions, and I'm super excited for you guys to join us. Most likely you're watching this in September. We are currently in the summer, and I'm super excited today to bring you a colleague of mine and someone that I admire so much. Today we have with us Emily Roden, who is a wife and a mother. Started as a teacher and educational consultant, and she noted that there was a gap in the family engagement field, and so she is the founder and president of ReadyRosie, and I'm super excited to have her with me. I have been a fan of ReadyRosie. I ran across this tool in the work that I was doing previously for a school district, and really did some hard analysis looking at how we engage families, and from that I became a super fan of the product and have really enjoyed working with Emily and getting to know her as a person and entrepreneur. And so I'm excited to hear about her journey today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Emily, and let you tell everyone about your journey.
Well, thanks, Michelle, and it is an honor to be here. I've respected you so much personally and professionally, and the time that we've gotten to work together. So to have this experience to just talk with you in a recorded way is fun and meaningful to me as well. So, my story is short, but I think it's an interesting crossroads of really what makes me tick and what has been my path in this journey to where I am today. But really, I think as I think back is that I've always had these two extreme interests professionally. One is, in both, I think really I inherited ironically from my parents, but it's really these two simultaneous interests of mine around education and entrepreneurship. And so the education interest, I think, really came from the fact that actually my family, my parents, did not have college degrees, but always wished that they did. And always talked to me and my sister about the importance of education and how important it was to get ahead, to learn. And although they didn't have a lot of formal post-secondary education, they really were kind of what I would say were lifelong learners. And I remember my dad, when I was studying SAT vocabulary words in high school, he took the challenge as well to learn and know more words than I did. So we had this ongoing challenge. And my mom was just an avid reader. And my grandmother was obsessed with politics and current events. And so we were constantly having these conversations around books and current events and great words and all of these things that were just a huge part of, to me, was our good life that we were experiencing was filled with these types of things, games and things like that. And then at the same time, I had this real interest in entrepreneurship. My dad lost his job very distinctly when I was a sophomore in high school, had always had the same job. And he started to really explore just different businesses he could pursue. Like I said, without a degree or a lot of formal schooling, he just started diving into a lot of different side businesses, and I would help him from paper routes to little security businesses that he created and things like that. And so it was always very interesting to me, this concept of creating and building with the goal of ultimately being able to support your family and being able to support yourself by something you've created really from scratch. So those two things I feel like have always just played into my professional and even my personal goals and careers, is just this fascination side by side with those two things, really never even thinking that they might converge. For example, and I know, Mechiel, you can relate to this, one of my early businesses in my 20s is I started a little minor antique and business where I thought, oh, I'll go to some garage sales, get these little finds, set up a little shop in a little antique mall, and had nothing to do with education. It was just really feeding that entrepreneurial soul of mine. But then professionally, I became a teacher. And so I never really thought that those two worlds would collide. And then, like you mentioned in the introduction, really started to see some needs in the field of education, that there was funding source for, but not really high quality solutions for. And so I knew there was an opportunity, and that's a big part of my journey. So I'll pause there and definitely can continue or go further, but we'll let you chime in with any questions on that.
I think that I try to think about the people who are watching this, and so I think some of the questions they're going to have is like, what was your teaching career like? Did you just do one thing? What is your range? For me personally, I started teaching out as a pre-K teacher, and probably would have predicted that would have been my entire road and journey. But I ended up teaching the fifth grade, and then was a principal up to high school. So, what was your experience as a teacher? What kind of was your journey in that time?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, actually, this is very ironic, but I actually became first a music and art teacher. So my background was actually within the arts, which is brings a really interesting, I think, perspective. And then as my journey in education continued, I became a classroom teacher, but also then almost immediately went into educational consulting, not in the field of music or art, in literacy and math, and with Pearson education at that time. And so really having that holistic perspective of what it's like to be a special areas teacher at an elementary school, and really see pre-K through fifth grade, and have this concept of the arts that I was trying to work with and teach, and then move into an understanding around classroom general instruction, general ed, was just a really interesting holistic background for me, but probably even more meaningful than the content areas and the focus on whether arts or literacy or other content areas. I think what was most meaningful for me were the types of schools that I got to teach in. And I taught in a some really interesting schools that were low socioeconomic Title I elementary schools that served a really interesting mix of families and children. One was located right next to University of North Texas in Denton ISD, which served a huge number of children and families who lived in the apartment and student housing, whether they were students at UNT or they just were, appreciative of that affordable housing that was located near the university, but combined with some professors' children, and seeing the mix of that as a real family, a school community, was really inspiring to me about what type of school I value, and what that can look like, and what that family, very diverse from education backgrounds of the families to the socioeconomic to the language, culture, everything was very diverse, but it because of the leadership and things like that, it worked really well. And in fact, I taught there, and now my kids go to school there. So I believed in it so much that we made sure that our children could experience that school community as well. So I think that had a big influence on me, really thinking about the family aspect and the holistic aspect of education when I was teaching there.
That's awesome. It makes me curious. I once worked at a school where the makeup of that school really mirrored the makeup of the larger city. So kind of echoes of what you said. And so I'm curious if you could take the makeup of that elementary school and then, could you find a comparison to that city, or a comparison to some other area? It might be somewhere in the world. There's probably some analytical, mathematical way to figure that out. But I do think it does feel really good when you know that your own children and the children of the community are getting to experience such a rich and diverse experience, wonderful traditions, ways of doing things, ways of thinking, ways of being together. So that's really, really incredible. I'm thinking about how, I don't know if it's a tripod or like a square box, but like, you know, you had your experience as a teacher, you had your experience being a resource provider in a company that works with school districts. And then there is you as a parent, and you and I both know how much that impacts the work. And then now as the owner and president of ReadyRosie. And so do you want to talk to us a little bit about the other two sides? You know, how did, I think I said on the earlier interview that I remember getting really offended when parents would ask me if I was a parent before I became a parent. It took a long time to become a family, and I remember just feeling some kind of way. But then once I had my son, I was like, okay, I get it. So, you know, how has that impacted the work? And then also talk with us a little bit about once you decided to start ReadyRosie, you know, how that has impacted.
Oh, those are great questions. You know, Michelle, I remember looking at lunches that kids brought or snacks that they brought to school and and this was pre-parent, right? Pre-parent teacher, and literally being judgmental about whatever the nutrition or the some aspect. Are you with me, Michelle?
Can you
speak for a second, but yep, yeah, we're good. But I remember, you know, being very judgmental and very proud of my opinions about child development and what was right and wrong, and really not having the lens of parenting that was even based on my own experience, but even just the lens of the value of diversity and the value of difference and the value of assets and strengths that we're all bringing to the table. I definitely did not have that lens as a teacher, especially before I was a parent. After becoming a parent, and I won't use any cuss words in our interview today, Michelle, but I just was like, oh crap, like this all my preconceived notions were out the window. And really, I always say I was focused on survival of me and this little gift that had just been given to me, you know? And so I think really that's another, I'm glad you brought that up, is just that crossroads of your professional life with your personal life. And when that collides and everything you believed and held to be true collides with something that you have so many more questions about and you're overwhelmed, and really that collision was really what evolved into ReadyRosie, because I really thought I had it all figured out. And then when I became a parent myself, and then a parent again with my second child, I really just felt this humility, and really threw my hands up in what's the best thing that I should be doing with the time I have to give them every day. And so I think you've probably heard me share this before, but I, you know, started Googling, right? Like, what should I be doing to support my children? My daughter was like a sponge at that age, around 2.5 when my second child was born. And I just, between working full time and having a newborn baby, my second child, I just felt so inadequate and so overwhelmed and frustrated, and knew I could be doing so much more. I knew all the pieces, but I couldn't really put them together in a way that I felt confident as a parent. And so really that is what launched into the concept of ReadyRosie. And once again, to mention my school background, I started thinking, you know, here I am, a teacher. I've been an educational consultant. I've read the books on early literacy. I've read all the books on, you know, conceptual thinking. I mean, I had this background, and I was still crying myself to sleep many nights thinking I haven't done enough. I didn't get a chance to even pour into my children the way I wanted to. And so when all of those worlds collided, I started thinking, well, what about our most vulnerable families? What about families that are working more than my one job, right? They're working multiple jobs or have multiple age children. And so it really started me thinking about how can we support all families, knowing that this journey is has many similarities for all families. And so that was really, those were really, like you mentioned, these legs coming together of a journey to create ReadyRosie.
Yeah, and I think that whatever we experience in our own lives, that becomes normal. Because as you were sharing that, you kind of touched on the edge of it, but I only have one child. So for me, whatever he experiences and does, that's normal, or I'm looking to see context for that. But you have the blessing of having 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. So you have gender differences, learning differences, strengths, all these differences. And so I would imagine that that's a huge asset for you as you go about making decisions about starting ReadyRosie. And like you said, a bit of impetus. If we're having these anxieties, I'm at the stage now where I'm trying to launch him out into the world, hopefully to, get a degree or something to, for his career. We're finishing up high school. So, not having done this before, I've been a high school principal, but it's different when it's your own child. So, all these things you supported before, college awareness and career awareness, it takes on a new importance and a new lens when you're doing it for yourself. But then you think about other families who have serious challenges, families who have no one in their camp that they can turn to. And so do you want to talk a little bit about having 3 different children, and there you could pull children from anywhere and no one's going to be identical, and how did that inform your work at ReadyRosie?
Oh, absolutely. Well, not only having 3 children, but also I will say, all of my children, our babysitter, while I was working and supporting ReadyRosie, especially in those early phases, our babysitter was born and raised in Mexico, and she's pretty much part of our family and is with us all the time. And so my children grew up in a very bilingual environment. And so not only having 3 children, but also having this amazing cultural influence on our family that then led to my children are in one-way bilingual programs, dual language programs within our school district. And so I think it's been such a blessing to see the uniqueness of my children, right? And the three perspectives they bring, combined with the amazing experience it has been to be a non-dominant Spanish speaker myself. I'm really to keep up and to understand all the notes home and the when we get together as a for class parties and class performances, and to be to experience families in that capacity as well, and the impact, the positive impact that that's had on my children as well. I think all of those things combined has really have been a really significant part of my journey. And then Mechiel, as I shared with you, just 3 months ago, my son was officially identified as dyslexic. And so that's been another really interesting piece of this journey, to understand and really embrace the strengths of learning differences, and that they come with both strengths and challenges, but what that looks like and how that makes him unique, and how I can be a loving, supportive parent through this journey with him that looks different for my other 2 children. And so it's just, I think I'm just like you said, I'm very grateful to have that diversity right here in my own home, to really have those influences of some of those really interesting things that I know many parents are dealing with in the diversity of their own children everywhere.
Right. So I'm thinking about how it may be just a stage of my age in life, but the unique messages that children tell themselves, and adults also, but specifically children. And so I just was looking at a beginning of a college essay this weekend I love looking at student writing because you get an insight into their brain. And so even though my own child at my home, you think you know, but then when you start reading and you're like, oh, I didn't know that you thought that. And so, you know, as your second child is going through that journey, you know, what he's telling himself about that, and you know, how that impacts decisions we make moving forward. And I think we're going to transition into the 20 questions here in a second, but I think it would be good for you to tell maybe the viewers a little bit about the intentional decisions you made when you developed ReadyRosie. For maybe somebody who's not familiar with ReadyRosie, I think for me, what comes to mind as a more of a consumer is you know, there are a lot of, well, there's not a lot. There's a handful of family engagement tools that are out there for specifically the elementary age. And what I feel like I found was very not teacher facing, but it looked like it was created by a teacher expecting the parent to be the teacher. And what I loved about ReadyRosie is that it is so user friendly from the perspective of, you know, you could be any kind of parent. You could be a parent who has a doctorate degree and, you know, just really proficient and really have all the resources in the world. Or you could be a parent who really is in some really challenging situations, and maybe Spanish is your first language. And I think that the diversity of skill and knowledge that's practiced, I think the diversity of location that the practice can happen. And I think that it really, the fact that it was focused in on early years, I think when I look at any kind of resources, it's like pre-K to 12th grade, and you're like, there's no way this is a good tool because there are such unique needs. So do you want to touch briefly on that, about some intentional decisions you made?
Oh, thanks for asking that. That's a great question. I think when we first started ReadyRosie, one thing that we talked a lot about was the dignity of the role of the parent, and how universal this experience is. And when we looked at parenting interventions, typical parenting interventions, they often involved things like you know, a parenting class or a parenting workshop or some type of relationship with a social worker or case manager. And while those things are fabulous, and in no way am I putting some of those down, but there was such a, I was so worried about stigma or other issues that could be related to those, when the reality of the matter is we all need a case manager to guide us. We all need this support. I mean, and I say this with 100% you know, authenticity, is that I needed help. I needed prompts. I needed ideas. And so I wanted this universal kind of question of, how do I parent? How do I support? How do I nurture? How do I develop? How do I encourage? I wanted that to be an open question for us all, that this was not something just for, you know, low socioeconomic or at-risk families, but because it was universal, it supported all families in their journey. And that was really a big, even though very much so my heart, my desire is that this would help close the gap. This would help support families who are typically under-resourced or at risk, but with that mindset that this isn't, they are not alone in this parenting conundrum that we all find ourselves in. And so I really would say dignity was a huge part of what we thought about with ReadyRosie. But also joy. And I think if we could model and really inspire joy and bonding, bringing joy back into the parenting experience. So many of us are facing parenting with a lot of additional stress and stressors, whether they're financial, you know, cultural, you know, relational, marital. I mean, there's so much stress during the time, especially this window that we're raising young children, can be some of the most stressful times of our entire lives. And you tack that on to the fact that we're sleeping less because we have young children. We're sacrificing our own nutrition and exercise for them. There's so many aspects that are stressful and hard on our bodies. And so it's hard to be joyful in the midst of a time that is probably one of the most precious times of our lives, and definitely the most important for our young children. So really we thought, could we inspire a few moments of joy and hugging and high-fiving and laughing and bonding together? And I have to be honest, I have to center myself all the time that that's really, even during the COVID crisis when schools were closed and I was trying to work and homeschool, I kept thinking about just focus on joy, just focus on joy. And, you know, and it's going to be tainted if we just get pulled down by the frustration. And when I focused on joy, well, voila, a lot of times that involved reading books, or a lot of times that involved getting out the Monopoly game, or a lot of times those learning things happened when I just focused on, okay, take some deep breaths and focus on joy.
Don't you? That is so wise, because don't you think I myself as a learner, back to my childhood where my parent was trying to help me or support me, and maybe there ended up being tears and frustration. And
Yes.
I can think about times when I was supporting my own child and I felt like I was helping and there was tears and frustration. And maybe even you had to ask your partner or your spouse to help you because you don't have the skills. And so that really speaks to ReadyRosie, is that it shows parents that you can have opportunities where you're supporting the learner, but it's joyful. And I think that that's such a huge component of ReadyRosie.
Yes, yes. I think that if we can accomplish that, then we've can check a huge and critical check our list of supporting young children and families.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask you my 20 questions. You have the right to pass if there's anything.
Okay.
What's your favorite word?
Oh, I've been thinking about this a lot. I would definitely say, probably on this exact same topic, I would say joy is one of my very favorite words.
That's great. What's your least favorite word?
I don't know. I don't like the word log. Like, there's so many negative logging data, logging information, also food in the shape of a log. Like, nothing is pretty about log.
What's your favorite book?
So I really thought long and hard about this question, but I just read with my children, since during the COVID school closures, we took on the challenge and read the original Robin Hood by Howard Pyle, of which you can ask my children. I cried for a solid hour at the end when Robin Hood dies there with Little John. And I think that is currently, it is very recent, which is usually my favorite. It's usually the last book I've read is usually my favorite. But that one was very meaningful in the sense that I really feel like there was a lot of complexity to who Robin Hood is, that I could really relate to, both the desire to do good and virtuous things, but that sometimes impacted, had negative impacts and was at times misunderstood. Anyway, I'm really attracted to the complexity of characters and being able to, especially reading that with my children, to be able to talk about those complex choices with them was very emotional and very, very good. So I highly, if you haven't read it, I thought when I started it, the text is Old English. I mean, it's very medieval type English with thous and these and knowest and those kinds of words. And I picked it up and I thought, oh, my kids are going to tune this out in a heartbeat. Like, there's no way. But I thought, I'll give it a try. I'll just give it a try and see what happens. And we read that thing and we still geek out. My daughter prays every night at mealtime that she'll meet Robin Hood in heaven. So,
oh my goodness. The conversation, children and teachers are very black and white, right? Mm-hmm. And part of childhood is labeling good, bad, fun, not, like categorizing. Our brain is just constantly categorizing. And so, like, I think what you said, this dichotomy of how can a person be inherently good and make bad choice, where are you on the line of good and bad or good and evil? And so the conversations around that through text, making those connections, and without even realizing it, we know, I think Steph Harvey's work talks about text to text, text to world, text to self. Your children are making those connections, and it probably comes up in conversations with you. And as they continue to read, there'll be a text to text. So I'm wondering almost like, is there a modern day Robin Hood? Because I really geek out when you read something and you're like, well, this was a it's not so apparent because it's very modern. And then you later realize like this is a reinterpretation. So that's really exciting, and the kind of conversations that we wish for every family, right? And every classroom, that authentic reading and conversation.
Michelle, and I know you and I have spoken about this before, but I definitely want to say it for our audience as well. But I think that's been one of the most exciting things about being a parent as my children grow older and being involved. What does parent involvement or family involvement look like? And I think what was so fun about as we transition, and my youngest is in first grade or just completed first grade. But as we transition into enjoying books like that together, what I'm finding happens is that I am just excited about the books we're reading as they are, which I love picture books, and I love the books we would sit and read together for hours before going to bed. But as we now start thinking about things that it's been on my bucket list to read, right? Just personally, to read a great book like Robin Hood. And as we're reading things that are on my bucket list that are on that they're geeking out on and asking for just as much as I'm saying, no, I don't want to stop. Let's read another chapter. It really turns it from a chore or a to do of, oh, we need to read together, to just really an authentic, like, we're all so excited. Can we stay up 5 more minutes and read the next chapter? And it's like, yes, we can, because I want to read it too. But I think the other thing I really learned and reflected on in reading, that particularly with my son, and particularly immediately after the identification of dyslexia, I think this was very meaningful to me, because this is a text that he probably won't access personally for many, many years. We have a long road to get to where he would be able to access this. It's very complex, but the ideas and the truths and the values and the questions, the big picture questions and ideas that we uncovered and discussed and talked about, these were big ideas, big truths, big things around complexity of character and text to self connections. And we asked some hard, very complex, hard questions. And it really reminded me of, just as we think about the journey of reading and the journey of literacy, how we have to be both confronting these huge ideas that are so maybe beyond our personal reach and ability, from just a decoding and sense, but at the same time learning that skill consistently and learning aspects of the skill and improving, even as adults, our vocabulary and our comprehension and our connections and all of those kinds of things. So anyway, it was just a reminder of how just extremely gifted and challenged a child with a disability can be, in the midst of working through that learning difference as well.
Yeah, I'm going to try and say this quickly. I'm going to indulge in a tangent, but it is so important that because I know that educators will be watching this of all different degrees. It is so important that, first of all, that we're just mindful, because mindfulness will help us take action. And so being mindful that what might be apparent on a piece of paper or a testing set does not completely define a person. And that's why we all look back and sometimes feel convicted for practices that maybe we would change if we were in that situation anew. We are very good, I think, as a community about, with the best of intent, deciding, okay, what's your reading level? Doing, for example, guided reading, which is a great practice. So that's homogeneous. You're grouping kids by their like abilities and knowledge. But what happens, because as a teacher, it's very complex and complicated to think about pulling heterogeneous groups, which variety, and our brain is just like, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to go there. But the reality is, what you just did was illustrate a great example of, his thinking and his ability to engage in that text had nothing to do with his reading ability. And imagine if he never was able to engage with that until he was, one of the stories, and I know that I got this from another master teacher, but when you walk into the grocery store or Barnes and Noble, they don't scan you and say, okay, Emily Roden, you are master's level, so don't look at the magazines. Don't don't look at any kind of exercise. Just go straight to master's level work or doctorate level work. You would never want to go if that was the case. And so the same thing for kids. They need to have a very wide place to draw from. And then we think about what supports do they need. And frankly, success is when they're telling you. Like if Frank is like, I really want to read this, will you read it with me?
Yes.
And then the second thing I want to share is my son has, like all people, good and bad qualities. He's not a person who naturally says, I want to sit around and read. He's very active. He's an outdoorsy person. And so when he was in middle school, he was in a program to give you choice of reading for the summer. You would have 4 or 5 novels. And so he picked the one that had a sports person on the cover. So this was year 2 of this, probably his 7th grade year. So I went to pick up that book and I chunked it on his bed and said, here's your bed, here's your book. And he came into the kitchen. It was one of those rare moments that you feel like a good mom, because he came shopping or cooking and he said, we've got a problem. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, this book is poetry. And I was chopping, and in that moment, like the angels of good parenting came over to me. And so I just looked over my shoulder and I said, we don't have a problem. You have a problem. And I kept chopping and just moved on. And what happened was, it happened to be, it's a book by Kwame Alexander, who is a phenomenal author. And so he went to his room and he started reading, and he found out that it is story written in rhyme, and he loved that book. And it so happened that my work at that time had to do with students in middle and high school, and I eventually got to meet Kwame Alexander. And so for a brief moment, I was the coolest mom ever, because I met somebody that to this day, he'll say that is his favorite author. And the ability level of that book is, if you did a Lexile on it, would be way lower than the actual depth and complexity of that book. So you said it perfectly well, that yes, we can have a lot of knowledge, medical, academic, about kids, but they have to be given choice and a wide.
Oh, I love that story. Oh, and I'm definitely going to look that book up.
Send you the link. So in that vein, who is your favorite author?
I have been reading. This is so hard. Same with book. It's usually the last one I've read. So this is very timely. But I have been reading some very old school, and I can say this because I was born in the 70s. I've been reading some books that were written in the 70s and 80s by a man named Mortimer Adler about education, and he writes some beautiful books about how to listen, how to read a book. The one I've been reading on audio as I try and do some level of exercise every day is one on the Constitution. And his whole theory and premise is that for our democracy to survive, we have to have a thriving educational system. And what does that mean? To produce citizens that can keep our Constitution, our democracy thriving. And so it's been really interesting in these times that we're living in right now to think a lot about the role of education in the survival and prosperity of our country. And in my humble opinion, it is 100% dependent upon us as educators. And no pressure, but the very state of our country, I feel like, is definitely dependent on how we inspire young humans. And so his work really speaks to that, and has been at least making me think. Not that I agree with every single thing that I've read, but I think he brings a perspective that that at least makes me pause and think. And one of the things he writes about is great works that children need to be exposed to, which is where I kind of got the concept of picking up some great works and reading those with my own kids, like Roden and a few others. So yeah.
That's awesome. So you mentioned this earlier. So the question is, what brings you joy?
Oh, definitely. I guess we're running into some themes here, but definitely uh, my children. And I would go so far as to say, just to echo what I said earlier about learning side by side with them. It just brings a lot of joy. Like you said, it's one of those moments that you feel like, okay, something is happening that's right here in the midst of a lot of, pick up your room and, let's clean up these Legos, and we know you have to eat your vegetables. That there's just a few pockets in the day that we can say, let's cuddle, let's read a great book, let's laugh, those kinds of things. So that definitely is the highlight of my day every day.
What makes you sad?
I have felt very sad recently about the particular crisis that we're in, Michelle. And I know you and I have even spoken about this, but I feel like there's, I think the juxtaposition of the joyful experiences that I've had with my family during this time, and experiencing that, yet in the back of my mind, knowing that there's a lot of isolation happening with our families right now because of this closure of schools and the supports and the routines that we're used to as a society. I've seen reports, and my pediatrician was sharing with me reports recently about just the increase of child abuse cases during this time, the increase of divorce and of a lot of stressors on families right now, and it makes me very sad. And I think the saddest part is that we are all limited in our ability to get out, roll up our sleeves, and really connect with others. We're just limited for even personal responsibility of keeping everyone safe and healthy. So although I hope this podcast or this recording lives well beyond the COVID crisis, and we can look back and reflect on it, and we'll probably have new challenges and battles to struggle to think about when we get there. But right now, this is definitely the issue of our time right now is this very crisis, this pandemic that we're in.
Yeah, I think that we, our children will definitely have interesting stories to tell, and hopefully this will be a unique experience.
Yes.
Only experience in their lifetime. But I agree with you. What has been a challenge in your work that has taught you something?
This is a great question as well. So I think starting and developing ReadyRosie has had a whole host of challenges and rewards, great rewards. But I think the one thing that I would definitely say is really being very, very thoughtful in decisions. And Michelle, I'm a real optimist. I think most entrepreneurs probably are. You have to believe that the best is going to turn out. And you have to believe that there's a silver lining at the end of this struggle, and that it's hard and those types of things. And that was definitely the case with ReadyRosie. And I would say that if I've learned anything, it's not to not be an optimist, but it is to take a little bit more time in evaluating the possibilities, both positive and negative, and have a more realistic grasp on what those are and how you would really tackle them if everything doesn't come out sunshine and roses. I made some decisions in the early days of starting ReadyRosie that I thought, oh, we'll deal with that later. Yeah, maybe that wasn't perfect when we started it, but I'll deal with that once it's well established. Well, problems don't usually stay the same. They usually grow as everything grows. And so it's always better, I think, to be optimistic, but realistic, and to make sure you're dealing with problems right when they arise.
I think that's a little bit of definitely being an entrepreneur, but also life lessons of like, I can be very impulsive and impatient, and you want something and then you step into it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, did I really want this? Because then there is no opportunity that comes wrapped in perfect paper with no challenges, and so there's always many sides of a coin and things that you have to work through. So what what is a challenge that you're still noodling over, or something that you see in the future that you're trying to like, you want to unlock, a problem you want to address?
Yeah, so, Michelle, I think, like I said, keeping with this theme that we've really been talking about today, with ReadyRosie and really modeling what early childhood family engagement can look like, we definitely fell into, I think, a really nice pattern and model of how to communicate what these little snippets of time can look like for families. And it changed who I am as a parent. I hope it has that impact on many parents. But as my own children grow older, I have been thinking a lot about how to think about that as children grow older, and how to still promote some of those things, but it may look incredibly different for a middle school age child, a high school age child. But what does that bonding and joy look like, and how do we face challenges? The challenges are very different. Things like personal responsibility and wise decision making and trust and all of these things that happen as children grow older. So I'm definitely noodling on how can we build tools that support, that ebb and flow as children, grow and change in their development. And a few of my friends who are early childhood educators, and I put myself in this category as well, were like, man, we nailed early childhood, but this this older kids stuff is like eating our lunch. And so how do we, and I know there's other parents that feel the opposite way, right? Like they feel very much in their wheelhouse with teenage kids and being able to navigate those different challenges. So I think if we could, that's something I'm just noodling on. And I will say, for me personally, this really exploring books and great books, works, talking about current events, even geeking out on a science thing like, oh, I wonder why, that happens, or can ducks be potty trained? I don't know. Let's go research. I have no idea. The weird science questions have been, in other words, to put it very simply, learning together rather than me being the teacher has seemed to be a real interesting bonding for my children and myself. And so I'm kind of like, how could we equip other parents with that, inspiration to, you don't have to know it all. In fact, it's probably better if you don't, but y'all can, you and your children can have some questions together and learn together really almost daily. So that might be more in depth than even what you were looking for, but I think about that a lot.
I think that parents get tired, and when you're entering middle school, your body's going through a lot of changes. So terms like stinky and messy and hard to get along with could be applied, but they're also phenomenal, imaginative, funny, and fun. And so I think that equipping parents with the tools that they need, and understanding that the relationship has to morph and change. And like you said, some people are going to be more into it, whereas somebody really enjoyed the earlier years. But you have to kind of find your own pathway in the way to interact with each other. And I do think you're 100% right. Being the model of inquisitiveness, and I find being a model of patience. You think about the qualities you want your future adult to have. So modeling those and having natural situations, charity, understanding other people's perspectives. Politics are really interesting. I think that there are lots of opportunities, and I think that as children grow older, I'm by no means an expert, but as topics coming up, asking them what they're thinking and authentically wanting to know what they're thinking, sharing your thinking, and then your partner or your spouse, like everybody sharing their thinking, and then how are you respectful of people's opinions? How do you gather information? So all of that, I think, is so key, and it's definitely because there is a lot. Kids are really cute when they're young. There's this belief in our culture about the cuteness of kids, and they're precocious and all that. But when they get into middle and high, they're morphing into something different, and people don't always know how to best support them. So you've talked about reading multiple times. And so one of my fun questions I have is, if you are reading or you are writing, I want to know what you're snacking on and what you're drinking.
Well, so it depends on the time of the day, or sometimes even alternating, but definitely a good book or a good blog post is best accompanied with a glass of red wine and a bowl of popcorn. That is my all-time, probably daily pleasure, indulgence, if you will. So but if it's early morning, a good cup of coffee. Nothing beats a book and a good cup of coffee as well. So those are probably pretty standard, but definitely honest responses.
And I think that during this time period, we give more time and thought to those kind of, even almost ritualistic. We're
Yeah.
setting routines and making, decisions about what we want to be eating and drinking. So my last question is, well, I have two last questions. My last question that I want to ask you is about what's the best advice you've ever been given? And then the last question for sure is, what's a talent or a skill that very few people know you possess?
Okay, good. Then I'll answer those in that order that you just asked. I think the best advice that I ever received was definitely um, uh, from my dad, who is very wise but speaks very few words. We call him the man of few words, but when he does speak, you should listen up. But I told him that when I was younger, I was a junior in high school, and he sat down with me and said, "What do you want to be? We've got to start gearing up for college and career, and what do you want to be?" And I said, well, I think I either want to be a doctor or a lawyer, right? Because that's what you hear makes money and does well. And so I said, it's one of those two or whatever. And my dad told me, he goes, have you ever thought about car sales? Because he goes, and he really walked me through in a very pragmatic way my strengths and then the strengths needed for those other jobs, and they weren't a good fit. And I think about that all the time, of just really operating and loving your strengths, and working on your weaknesses, which I have to do all the time. I have some gaping weaknesses and holes in the way my brain works, but really always keeping in mind to where, when it comes to the majority of my day, to really be operating within those strengths and nurturing those strengths and trying to build upon those. And I think that was great. And I still want to sell some cars, maybe in my retirement or something, because I think I would be great at it.
That's a story.
And true.
So what
Oh, and then yes, and a secret skill if you were to ask my kids, my family, this, they would all. I have two really interesting secret skills. One is I can kill a fly like you've never seen. Like I'm 100%, like one for one. Oh, like I never miss a fly because I hate having any type of bugs or flies in my house at all. And my second is, and this has come in handy many times in my life, is I can sleep anywhere, in a plane, in a back seat scrunched up in a car, you name it. If I need if I need to take some Z's, I can do it, and that comes in handy quite a bit. So,
that is definitely a good skill in this life that we lead.
yeah, very random, but two skills that have served me well.
Awesome. Well, Emily, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know you have a lot on your plate, and I just really appreciate getting to know you better. And I know that our audience also, I will put all your contact information and info on ReadyRosie so that people can go and look. But I think it's been great to get to know you a little bit better. Thank you.
You too, Michelle. And I just have to say, even the fact that you're doing this is such an inspiration of really what we should all be doing, which is really just taking relationships and opportunities that we have, and just thinking about how we can leverage and just really grow. And I just really appreciate that. I've been thinking about this opportunity and just what you're doing and thinking I want to. It's been inspiring in my own life to think about how I can really just give back, take in and give back, and that's what you're doing. And I really appreciate you thinking of me.
Thank you. I think that the opportunity to really, I think I have it back here. What would you do if you could not fail? It's really not about me, but technology really affords us the opportunity to do anything we can dream of. And so one of the things I would
Yes.
could do anything is to magically travel and sit down with masterful people and ask them questions and get to know them. And knowing that we have a new generation of teachers coming on board, giving them the opportunity to really hear from masterful people and decisions they've made in their journey, I think is going to be really awesome. And I feel like I've been given the greatest gift and the ability to do these interviews. So thank you for being one of our masters.
Wow, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to this interview. I hope you found value in the conversation, made a connection with your own life, and had an aha moment or two.